Hello, this is Pick, and welcome back to my guide for FTB Sky's Expert Mode. Today is primarily going to be about fission and fusion, two different power types for mechanism, as well as their associated byproducts and requirements. The fission reactor is primarily composed of a few different blocks. We have fission reactor casing, which makes up the outer edges, reactor glass, which makes up the rest of each of the faces, and is also cheaper than reactor casing, fission fuel assemblies, and control rod assemblies. It's not that difficult to construct one of these reactors. The only limitation is that you need to make sure that control rods aren't touching each other, so you'll want to make a checkerboard pattern. The more control rods you have, the more fuel you'll be able to run at once, which means more power and more waste. Generally speaking, you're going to want to make a giant box. I would also recommend planning out what you're going to make beforehand, as once you have multiple of these multi-blocks around, it's going to be much more annoying to fix it if something is wrong. Once the reactor is assembled, it will give off particles and it'll tell you that it's ready to go. Right-click to open its GUI. You'll see a number of elements. The activate and scram buttons are the on and off buttons for the manual controls. You can also use control ports to use redstone if you'd like. Personally, I tried the redstone automation. I think it's better to just run it manually. A safe design is better than a controlled one. You'll also want to make sure you have 4 valves. One for fuel input, one for coolant input, one for coolant output, and one for waste output. You can shift right click on a port with a configurator to have it cycle through its different types. That would be input, waste output, or coolant output. To make a fission reactor, we're going to need some fissile fuel. I'm importing hydrofluoric acid from the sulfuric acid setup that I set up previously. I'm importing yellow cake uranium from the compact machine producing it, putting that yellow cake uranium into a chemical oxidizer, imported via ender chest, and then that uranium oxide gets mixed with the hydrofluoric acid to make uranium hexafluoride in the chemical infuser. This then gets sent to the isotopic centrifuge, in which it becomes fissile fuel. The rate at which fuel is consumed is determined in the GUI. You can go in there and manually change the fuel rate. You'll need to strike a balance between how much fissile fuel you're making and how much you want to actually be using. However, I'm of course not going to bother turning it on until the rest of the things are set up, so it'll just accumulate fissile fuel over time. Because I keep going through liquid elemental void in the uranium producing process, I'm of course going to need production of Ostrum automated. I never set up a laser mining drill, and I'm not going to. Instead, I'm just going to keep running the builder quarry at a rather large range. Then I can use my Fortune 10 pickaxe to mine at least 6 or so from each ore. You can use a deployer if you'd like to do that automatically. Then I can simply export into this setup and it will automatically give this merit crusher the raw Ostrum to turn into Ostrum dust. Eventually I'll do the same for Desh. Note that if you're using ME export buses, you're going to require a capacity card. That will allow you to export more things from the export bus at a time. You can also control the thing with redstone to make sure that it only outputs one at a time, to stop it from backlogging the crusher. The next thing you're going to want to set up is a large thermoelectric boiler. This is what's going to take the heat out of the reactor and put it into the water to make steam. You could pump water into the reactor directly, but it's very inefficient, so I'd highly recommend using a boiler instead. You're of course going to need to facilitate transfer of both coolant and water into and out of the boiler. Basically, you'll want hot coolant going out of the reactor and into the boiler, and cold coolant going out of the boiler and into the reactor. The coolant I'm using is sodium. This is gotten by sending brine through the electrolytic separator. I would recommend building up a surplus of this, as you're going to want more and more and more of it, so make sure you have an ultimate tank at least storing sodium, from where you're making your chlorine for your hydrochloric acid for uranium processing. While I currently have them separated and was going to transport the coolant using pressurized tubes, it's ultimately better to do it by making the reactor and boiler touch. It will automatically export all available coolant into the respective machine when it's finished processing it, and you don't have to worry about transfer rate or anything. It takes me a while to get to that though. So for now you know how to do it. To construct the boiler, you're once again going to need to make a box out of boiler casings, and those will comprise the edges as before. Structural glass will replace the reactor glass this time, and then what's inside on the bottom goes superheating elements. The more of these there are, the faster you will heat the water and turn it into steam. You'll also need pressure dispersers placed a bit of the way up. Generally speaking, the more space there is between the superheating element and the pressure disperser means that more water will be able to be stored within the boiler. The more space between the pressure disperser level and the roof of the boiler will allow you to store more steam. As long as you're exporting steam fast enough, you shouldn't need this to be too big, but it will limit and throttle how much steam you're able to make at a certain point. I don't know everything about the ins and outs of putting things into mechanism machines, so I do make a few mistakes here and there, and you'll have to bear with me for that. I auto-crafted an infinity water cell. This is an infinite water source, all present in one ME drive. It's not that great, honestly. It can't really keep up with the boiler, solely because of exporting problems. I'll be upgrading the water production over the course of the episode, and you'll see just how many things I try throwing at it. The last component you're going to need is the industrial turbine to actually make energy out of all that steam. For a crash course on how this thing works, for the third time, use X casing as the edges, use X glass as the sides. That would be turbine casings and structural glass, of course. However, you're going to have to construct the turbine on odd dimensions. What this means is that the interior has to be a 3x3, 5x5, etc. Place the turbine rotor shafts going up the center, and then hold right-click on that center shaft with your blades to automatically place them down. You can't have the blades touching the walls of the turbine, so you'll need to make sure that your height and width are in proper alignment with each other. At the top of your rotor shaft, you're going to want to place a rotational complex. Then fill the rest of the level with pressure dispersers. And from here, the outside should be comprised entirely of turbine vents, except for the edges. Above here, place 1 to 3 layers of electromagnetic coils. For me, 2 was more than enough. And finally cap that off with more turbine vents. Then you'll have to place down your valves. I guess I didn't state it outright, but of course the boiler needed valves as well. You can get away without the boiler and turbine touching. Do you want to see how crazy I drove myself by not making the reactor and boiler touch? I tried this whole complicated thing with entangled blocks, except mechanism transmitters seem to disconnect from entangled blocks sometimes for some reason. Then I tried chemical tanks, except those can't auto-pull, so that doesn't work. And of course I needed 2 sets of everything. One for cooling in, one for cooling out. I did a whole bunch of testing on this in creative mode, to make sure all of my math was correct, and that all of that effort was wasted when things just didn't work. Also, to feed it water, of course I'm using export buses with a whole bunch of acceleration cards. You can also upgrade those to extended export buses, which allegedly upgrade it to 8 times faster. And even with 16 of those running at max speed, it is not enough to feed the stupid boiler. As I generate a full reactor's worth of sodium, I also worked on all the processing for the nuclear waste. Nuclear waste can be transformed into 2 different byproducts, plutonium and polonium. I also set up a little redstone controlled system to turn it on or off in a particular direction if I only want one of the byproducts. This will be handy later because I'm not going to want a massive supply of plutonium. I'd recommend making around 2 stacks of plutonium, and that should be enough. You can right-click a pressurized tube to turn on redstone sensitivity. Regardless of which method you choose, if you're going to be turning them into pellets, you're going to produce spent nuclear waste. This should be piped into radioactive waste barrels, where it will passively decay and safely go back into the environment as very low radiated material. Don't break tubes that have radioactive material in them. I end up making that mistake and poisoning the environment around me. However, that's why I made it all the way in the corner of the base. I can keep all of the radiation contained in this corner and it won't impact the rest of the base for the most part. You'll need a handy supply of fluorite dust to produce all of these pellets, so keep that in mind. Also, of course, the solar neutron activator processing the nuclear waste into polonium only works during the day. The isotopic centrifuge for plutonium works all the time. I have nowhere near enough sodium to run this thing at full speed. I'd recommend completely filling it before you do, but we can do a little trial run with the low burn rate. The place you change the burn rate is that little eye in the corner of the GUI. When it has insufficient coolant, or it doesn't have enough way to disperse the heat it's generating, it's going to heat up the reactor. While it's going to go up a little bit and make a safe temperature of around 550K, if it goes higher than that due to insufficient coolant, it's going to start heating up the reactor way more. Eventually, the reactor will start taking damage, and when damage reaches a critical level, of course, it's going to explode. Not explode in a big boom, but it is going to break parts of the fission reactor, and it's also going to leak radiation into the environment. So now let's run it properly where it's actually able to move its coolant between the boiler and the reactor. The burn rate is going to determine your boil rate and thus determine the power rate for the reactor setup. You're going to have to fiddle with it to see what type of burn rate you can possibly handle. Start small and work your way up. you're definitely going to want to watch it closely every time you change it. There are three main factors that will affect how your reactor is able to dissipate heat. The first is having enough coolant. This is simply solved by having a full tank of sodium. The second is the ability for it to remove the coolant and to get more coolant. These are kind of the same thing because they're both a transfer issue. By making them go port to port, it won't be a problem. The third is how much water is going into the boiler. This is the most annoying thing to deal with, but generally speaking, you're going to want to make sure you have water to boil so that the coolant can cool down and go back into the reactor. Now we begin the part where I throw everything at the wall to try and get more water into the reactor and see what sticks. The first thing I did was, as I said, upgrade to those extended export buses that are 8 times faster than the normal ones. The problem is that they don't export per tick. They also don't fill the boiler a whole lot in the first place. The next thing I tried was making a bunch of electric pumps. By putting a whole bunch of speed upgrades in them, I can make them pump really quickly. Theoretically, if I put enough of them down, I guess it would eventually have enough water. And of course, our buddies the time torches are there to accelerate all of my methods. But even this proved to be insufficient unless I really made a ton of them. Another thing I tried was to keep an ME interface stocked with water. I tried using a little integrated dynamics here. Woo, I'm actually using it, not. Put the interface onto the ME interface, and then put some logic cables up to an exporter, and maybe it would export water like a little bit faster. You can put a variable card in and have it export at the integer limit, but that requires the tank to have the integer limit of fluid inside of it, and even then I couldn't get it to work properly. That leads us to Super Factory Manager. This can take from entire inventories and put them in entire other inventories. You'll have to write a little bit of basic code to get it to function. It also only works every second. Of course, the reactor runs every tick, but you can make up for this with a type of code spam. The general basics on how it works is that you can optionally put a name at the top of your program, then you say how often you want it to run. This will make a type of loop. The loop will run perpetually. You'll need a program disk and put it inside the factory manager itself. You can tell it where to input from and where to output to. These are not case sensitive, so you can have them be capital or lowercase if you'd like. And you'll also need to make some labels for destinations. These are effectively variables, and you can define them in the world. Shift right click on the manager with the label gun, and this will pull all labels from the manager that you've written in your code and put them into the gun itself. Now you can shift and scroll to cycle through your different labels, and you're going to right click on blocks that you want to call with that label. So my water source being a water tank is what I want to be water, and then the place it's going will be boiler. You can have as many of each as you want. The water tank is the native form of having an infinite water source. You can also connect water tanks together to make a larger inventory. However, it will only take from that size of the tank, so it will only do one bucket from a one size tank for operation. Once you've set everything up properly, it will go ahead and put water into the boiler every second, as I've set it up to do. I'll be greatly upgrading this later though. Also, you want to make sure that everything is either touching the manager itself or is connected via inventory cables. You can also repeat commands to make it force transfer more per operation. So I made a bit of a whoops. Remember when I said you shouldn't break pressurized tubes with radioactive material in them? Yeah, I ended up doing that because I had a bunch of pipe problems and all the stuff was ending up in the wrong pipes and it was annoying. So now the surrounding area is radioactive. Lovely. And it'll take around 5 hours for it to go away. Double lovely. Well, I have no need to put on my space armor for right now, so I guess the radioactive protection suit will have to do. You can bust out the old Geiger counter to tell what the radioactivity in a given area is. Honestly, the damages could have been worse. Not even my cows are really that irradiated, and they're within view shot of the reactor. Obviously, you still want to be careful with this stuff, but again, that's why I built it in the corner of the base. The radioactivity greatly drops the further away you get from the source, of course. To battle this, I've set up a microfusion extrapolator over by the reactor. This didn't really make that much radioactivity in the grand scheme of things, but a microfusion extrapolator can still help clean up some of that lingering radiation. I'm just going to fill it up with some void fluid and some lead crystals and give it some heat via quantum entangleporter from the compact machine. This is basically a radiation sponge if you want to look at it like that. It won't be able to completely clean up the area, but it's kind of its own little blocker to keep it from spreading further in a given direction. This isn't meant for a large-scale application of uranium production, mind you. It's simply a radiation guard and nothing else. Quite an expensive radiation guard, but you know. For my next trick in upgrading water production, meet Laser IO. Well, you've already met Laser IO, I guess. The point here, though, is that by putting in 9 cards, all with maximum overclocker cards, and a bunch of node overclocker cards as well, I can theoretically get a whole lot of water into this reactor. It does help. I'm filling a supermassive fluid drawer with water from the Super Factory Manager. As long as I outproduce it, it should be able to get all of that water through. And the Super Factory Manager can completely outpace the laser node as long as I copy and paste its code a bunch. You know, so it exports way more per second than it would just by one operation. At max, the laser node can handle, I believe it's 36,000 millibuckets, so 36 buckets per tick. Then I tried running it from the ME interface itself. I tried to keep it stocked with a full inventory of water in every slot and extracting it with pipes, but of course that didn't work either. Well, you know, it worked, but it wasn't nearly sufficient enough. So many methods to put water in this stupid reactor that I've tried. I should also mention that I did hook up the Super Factory Manager inventory cables to the reactor's valves itself. This does fully fill the reactor every second, but of course it goes through all of that in that second, and so it doesn't refill fast enough. For reference, I think I've gotten it up to like 20 millibuckets per tick at this point. Not awful, but not fantastic either. Now that it's been running for a while and I've been able to collect some polonium pellets, what can we make with it? Well, the first thing I'd like to make is a Mekasuit. This is going to be the ultimate armor. It'll basically be both the radiation suit and the space suit in one, as well as something that's just really protective. Put this on and there'll be very little that can actually kill you. You'll need to make each component, of course. That requires some polonium, an induction cell, some netherite armor, some high-density polyethylene, and an ultimate control circuit apiece. The main benefit with this though is that it has upgrades you can give it. To make these upgrades, I'm going to need a modification station. You'll need to provide upgrades into each piece of your armor. Mainly the energy units to have it store more energy, and radiation shielding units to shield from radiation. You'll also want space breathing. I don't show it on camera, but basically you make one of those, slap it on the helmet, and then you have oxygen cans in your curio slots, and it will take oxygen from those instead of forcing you to wear the spacesuit. The modification station takes in power from the back, by the way, and you might want to speed it up with your temporal pouch. I also made a jetpack unit for the chest piece. This means I can fly using Mechanism's jetpack. Obviously I have R's flight around the base, but anytime I'm out of range it will be nice to have Mechanism's hover mode. That goes for other dimensions as well as the corners of the base that aren't touched by the flight rituals. I also upgraded my atomic disassembler into the Mekatool. Just, you know, better atomic disassembler. Can also give it silk touch if you'd like. It's a tool, what do you expect? It's worth noting that you can't actually enchant any of this stuff, that's what the upgrades are for. Well, now that we've made all of that stuff for the fission reactor, let's move on to the fusion reactor. Yeah, we need even more power compared to what we have. Our end goal today is antimatter production. The fusion reactor is of course going to require fusion reactor frames, as well as some ports, some reactor glass, a laser focus matrix, the controller. It's worth noting as well that I'm going to have to make a water-cooled reactor, not an air-cooled reactor. Air-cooled reactors have been substantially nerfed, which is fine. I should have enough fuel to barely make enough antimatter, right? Oh wait, I haven't made the fuel yet. Oops. I guess I haven't made the fission reactor yet either. To make the fusion reactor, you're going to want to make this sort of star formation as the base, and then build up some rings around it. It's basically a bunch of giant plus signs, with some extra blocks, I guess. At the top center, you're going to want to put the controller. Ports can go anywhere, put them in the most convenient locations. Make sure you have a laser focus matrix on the side, and I like having some glass so I can see inside it. Originally, I only planned on making the air-cooled reactor before I did some creative testing to see if that would actually work. You're probably going to want some more ports. I eventually make more so that I can fit more water into it. But it does still have an energy output alongside a steam output, so yeah, you're going to want, I believe it's 5 ports. A water input port, a fuel input port, an energy output port, a steam output port. Well, I have a second water input port, one for the input cable to directly connect to, and the other for some piping. Again, we'll get there though. To activate the reactor, you're going to need a really strong laser. Hook up a bunch of laser amplifiers and have them point into the center of the reactor activation matrix. Make sure the one closest to it is set to only go with a redstone signal. This is going to let it build up charge. Then, place a bunch of lasers pointing into those amplifiers and it will accumulate that many lasers times 40 RF per tick. Let it run over time. It's gonna take a while, but you know, that's why we do it now. I'm having it be powered with the energy produced by the turbine. I'm not really using it for much else at the moment. Remember that the rest of the base is currently mostly powered by those coils. You will want to be careful though, because I have inventory charging on from one of my flux points. I wound up charging a laser, and that ended up accidentally breaking some of the blocks in my automated cake setup, and I had to go fix that, you know, a whole mess. To power the fusion reactor, I'm going to need both deuterium and tritium. These are both things that are obtained basically from water. Deuterium comes from when you have electric pumps with a filtering upgrade. That produces heavy water, which then gets sent through the electrolytic separator to make deuterium and oxygen. Of course, the deuterium replaces the hydrogen. I mean, deuterium is an isotope of hydrogen. In any case though, of course you're going to want some time torches and stuff to speed things up, as well as a whole bunch of speed upgrades. You'll be making sure that it's going to run fast enough to produce enough fuel to keep the reactor going. Or at least you could. What I'm actually going to do is stock up on enough DT fuel to run the reactor just to make enough antimatter. I'd recommend going for about 4 full chemical tanks of the ultimate tier. That should be enough DT fuel to get you the antimatter you need. But if you want to make 1000 DT per tick, you can do that. Technically speaking, you could get away with lower fuel rates. If you put the deuterium and tritium in separately, rather than combining them with a chemical infuser, you can lower the rate of fuel used. However, we wanted to make stuff as fast as possible because we're not looking for something sustainable, we're looking for something to push us to the end. Tritium is made from gaseous lithium. As you recall, lithium was made by putting brine through the thermal evaporation plant. Then put that lithium through some solar neutron activators and that will turn it into tritium. This is likely going to be your slow step, as basically every step along the line for tritium is solar powered. Whether you're making your heat in the brine production from solar energy or you're making the tritium from the lithium in the solar neutron activators. I end up with 4 of them in the end. Again, you're going to want to stock up. I guess now is a good time to mention though that I am building up on polonium. You see, once I made like 600 or so polonium pellets, I figured that was enough for the rest of the pack. So everything else is getting stored within some nuclear waste barrels. When you store plutonium or polonium in radioactive waste barrels, the waste doesn't actually disperse. It instead sits in there without decaying, which is good. I want to fully fill 4 of those with polonium. That will be enough to make the 2 antimatter pellets I'm looking to make, as well as some bonus. You'll want a little bit of extra antimatter sitting around, but you're not going to need too much beyond that. It could easily take up to like 10 hours to make all of it if you're not running your fission reactor with enough fuel throughput, so I definitely try to upgrade that as much as you can. While I am forced to wait though, that's a good amount of time to allow DT fuel to accumulate. Again, make sure you have at least maybe 4 ultimate chemical tanks storing it. I only made a couple and well, that kinda backfired. And of course, the last step is going to be to combine these things in a chemical infuser. You might want to make 2 of them. Again, if you do want to run this thing at full speed consistently, you'll want to make 1000 millibuckets per tick of DT fuel. Did someone ask for more lithium? Yes? No? Me? Sure. I'm adding a whole lot more water production to these thermal evaporation towers. Also, instead of just relying on the heat from the solar generators, I'm also getting that excess heat from the compact machine making the uranium. I'm using it in place of what I had powering that microfusion extrapolator, as it has enough heat to last for a while. This will speed it up a little bit, and it'll also allow it to run at night. And as you can see, I have completely swarmed the area with time torches. Speaking of reactor heat, it's time to switch from yellow cake to polonium pellets. I have a whole bunch of them spare, and they last literally hundreds of hours. So by switching some of them out, I'm decreasing my yellow cake usage. They make 6 times the radiation and about 2 times the heat. Again though, the real benefit is that it lasts way longer. I've decided to make the reactor taller. Whether you make it taller or wider doesn't matter too much, though if you make it wider it's going to cost more assemblies at the top. Each fission fuel assembly adds 1 millibucket per tick max to how much the reactor can make. It will take you several hours at least to get all that polonium, so you are going to want to try and make the reactor run as fast as possible so long as your fission fuel production can keep up. The reactor will keep its contents when you break it and reform it, as long as you don't completely break it down. This makes upgrading it a fairly simple process. Now, if I'm going to make more of those laser nodes and overclocker cards and all that junk, I'm going to need more platings from the space metals. I never quite automated that, so how about we do that real quick, huh? There are numerous ways you could do this. You could use a quantum ring if you really wanted to, but I'm going to do it the lazy way. By setting up the pattern provider on an ender chest, I can simply send all the materials into space through the ender chest. Then I can use a laser node to put things in with the laser node that's already inside the compressor. To ensure the first slot always has the Mega TNT in it, I'm going to prime it by putting in some Mega TNT. What this means is that it's only going to send 1 recipe at a time. So because there's already Mega TNT in there, the metal will only be able to take the second slot. You could also just make sure it's ordered properly so that it only sends it in that order, but I think it's easiest to just prime it and then not have to worry about it. And of course, the laser nodes can go through blocks, so you can just have them connect through the aluminum glass. Make sure you filter the cards to only import or export the thing you want them to do. You might also want to put radiation shielding in there, since it's also made by this machine. As a reminder, Laser I/O has filter cards that you'll need to set to put inside the item cards that are moving the items around. You can also overclock them, and by clicking the numbers on the right side, you can Control-Shift-Click the numbers to make them go up a lot, and Control-Right-Click to make them go down a lot. That's how I was able to do all those water nodes at the max speed. You want a fast transfer rate and a low tick rate. Now, what to do while waiting for the reactor to run? How about we prep the end portal frames? There's plenty to do in the meantime for that. One ingredient I'll need that I don't have any of is Purpur Blocks. The easiest way to do this is to just make a Lord of Darkness bee. Simply take a bee, give it a pure daisy to make it a pure bee, then give it a proto-chorus to make it a Lord of Darkness. And then we just stick it into the beehive, wait, and it'll make all the combs we need for just 6 Purpur Blocks. Once you get some combs, you can process them in the fabrication matrix. Just to process combs, you don't need to make the whole multi-block structure that you need for other things. Also, for some reason I thought you needed honey in the input. Honey is an output. Yeah, I don't know why I thought that. I'll need some resonant ender as well, so I'll get that smelting up in a magma crucible. The last thing I'm going to require to make these end portal frames that I don't have already or can make in a single step is stabilized void ingots. Really, the only bad part of this that makes it noteworthy is the Terrasteel. You could set up some fancy process for it, but the easiest way for me to do this is to just automate it by using a precision dropper on the pattern provider like the other things Botania has. However, I think the easiest way to make sure it makes only 1 Terrasteel at a time is to make sure that you have a requester going. The requester can request like 16 Terrasteel stocked in the system, but you only craft 1 of them at a time. This means they won't overlap with each other. However, this isn't that simple. My mana production isn't quite up to par, so I'm gonna end up having to upgrade that. To make the sentient steel, I do need a supply of Cognitium. Easiest way to do that is to just slap a storage bus onto an experience obelisk. It'll be able to read the Cognitium as a fluid and take it out when it needs it. Now, let's go check on that fission reactor. Oops. Not quite sure what happened. Now, this isn't the first time this reactor has melted down on me. I've just happened to load it back up every time it did. This time, though, I'll at least show you that, yes, it is something that can happen. I'm not entirely sure what happened, but I guess I'll have to turn the burn rate down. Like I said, you gotta be really careful with this stuff. And you know what? I did say that I was going to cheat a lot at the beginning of this series, didn't I? I have barely cheated so far, So let's break in a tiny little bit of cheating just to repair this reactor, even though realistically I could just queue up a bunch of the components and fix it. Look, I'm right at the end, I'm getting kind of tired. I'm still having fun, but, you know, even through this though, it does keep all the sodium that was in it, so again, don't worry. Oh, by the way, the microfusion extrapolator? Yeah, it did its job. Made 26 uranium crystals. Almost the 27th. Pretty good for a precautionary measure. Now, in order to make more mana, I'm going to make a Narslimmus farm. It's a pretty efficient farm when it comes to mana generation, though I'm not going to be designing it in the most efficient way possible. That's okay though, I'm just going for a boost in my mana production. What the Narslimmus does is it eats slimes that come into contact with it. However, this only applies to naturally spawning slimes from slime chunks. This will not work from dreadful dirt, or other types of spawners. You're going to want to make sure that you're funneling all of the slimes into one location so that they can be absorbed. So here's a basic pushing system I've made for the slime farm. You'll notice that I actually don't have any particles coming from these fans. That's because I turned them off for frame rate issues. Unfortunately, having the particles on just drags things down below 20 FPS, and you guys don't need to see that. In any case though, an electric motor is a good way to portably get SU over here. Set them to about maybe 160 RPM, and it will blow the fans at such a speed that they will push all of the slimes into the hole in the corner. They then land on the Narslimmus, which the Elven Mana Spreader picks up from and outputs into that mana pool. But how do we get the mana from over here over to the main base? Currently, I'm working on what's known as a mana Tesseract. When crafting these items in the runic altar, you actually get the runes back, so you only need one of each. But what I'm making is 2 mana Tesseracts. These allow mana to be teleported from one place to another, so long as both the chunks are loaded. Using it is fairly straightforward. Make a Tesseract attunement tool and rename it. Then craft it with the Tesseracts you want to link to that frequency. Place a spark on it and the mana pool you're trying to take from. Then make sure that the direction is going in the correct way. You'll want to take from the spark and put it into the Tesseract on the sending end, and then the other way around on the receiving end. Naturally, on the end that you want to send to all of your other mana storage, you're going to want to put a recessive spark on that Tesseract. Weirdly enough, orange is the one you want on the sending end, and blue is the one you want on the receiving end, where normally the colors are the other way around for most mods. I'll still have a bit of waiting on Terrasteel, but at least the waiting will be much shorter now. Okay, time to let those end portal frames craft up. Now it's just a matter of waiting. I never said it outright, but spirited crystals are just made with plutonium pellets sent through the energizing orb. Not worth showing because, you know, not that complicated of a process. Everything else is stuff we've already had auto-crafted or stuff I just discussed. Man, can you really believe we're this close to the end of the mod pack? Unbelievable. Next episode's going to be the last one. Isn't that sad? But it will give me more time to work on my next mod pack. Alright, who's ready to... Oh, okay. I did get that end portal frame back, but it did reject me from placing it, because apparently I have to place it on Glacio. Pretty sure I needed cryo fuel somewhere in that recipe, but oh well. To Glacio we go. When placing down your end portal frames, make sure you're doing it while standing in the center. This ensures that they're all oriented properly. Then, typical stuff, make sure all the snow is out of the way, fill it up with Eyes of Ender, and you can go to the end. The end is pretty normal for the most part, honestly. You have a dragon, I guess it has 3 heads instead of 1 this time, and it has maybe like slightly better attacks, I think. With the Mekasuit, it poses basically no threat to me at all. So I'm just gonna run through, beat the dragon, win, go home. Well, I guess I'll explore for a bit after I beat it. And that's just about it for the Trigon. Again, with the Mekasuit, it posed basically no threat at all. I mean, you know, if you've fought an Ender Dragon before, you could probably do it perfectly fine even without all of my insane armor. The armor just makes it that much easier to get it done. I don't even know if the egg is used for anything, but I guess I should pick it up anyway, right? Sometimes you might find apothic bosses lying around. I guess you could kill them if you'd like. They tend to have a lot of health. Ones in the end also tend to be of the master rank. But you know what? With the Mekasuit, they pose no threat at all. Who would have guessed? make sure to pick up some chorus fruit. That's more or less the main reason of coming all the way out here. You could have gotten it from the SPS, which we haven't made yet, but why would I do that when I can just come out to the end anyway? Also worth noting, your Eye of Legend will turn into the End Eye of Legend when you're in the end. You know, like how it turned into a Nether one in the Nether. This means that you can find end cities fairly quickly. My quickest way of getting around the end right now is my glide spell, but combined with my mechanism jetpack. It's basically jet-powered elytra. I would explore the end for a little while. Try to get 5 dragon heads if you can. They'll be useful for upgrading to the top tier Apotheosis enchanting setup. Beyond that, you can collect whatever other gear you find. You might find some more mythic Apotheosis gear. Now that I've said everything I need to say about the end though, I'll meet you back home. Alright, who's ready to make the SPS? It's just 6 rings that are all touching each other. Fill it in with structural glass. Then make 3 ports, and a supercharged coil that gets placed on one of the input ports. It doesn't have to be on all of the centers, interestingly enough. Though I do end up redesigning it to have it be in the center just because. You'll see what it looks like when I'm all ready to go. This is the thing that's going to turn Polonium into antimatter. I'll be setting up all the pressurized tubes, but not connecting them. Once I'm ready to go, I'll start hooking things up, but if I want to make any last minute changes, it's smart to not have it already inside the multi-block that will get moved. You can never be too careful with these highly time-expensive things. I really don't want to wait even longer for all of that polonium. Alright, what else can I do to kill some time? How about some apotheosis stuff? I never did get up to level 100 enchanting after all. Let's get started by making and infusing a whole bunch of Deepshelves. I don't quite need 15 of them, but you know, better safe than sorry, I guess. I don't see myself max enchanting any gear, especially because my current best gear is unenchantable in the first place, but still, if nothing else I should show it off, right? Now to turn a few of them into Endshelves. You'll notice that the Eterna keeps going up. I'm trying to get to the maximum of 50, and that's only possible with Draconic level Endshelves. Of course, those Draconic Endshelves don't provide any stats other than Eterna, but that'll be a good thing for what's coming up. What I'm working on here is a Charm of Flight. However, I need to infuse it to make it unable to be broken. This can finally replace my jetpack. Well, I guess it's baked into my armor, so it doesn't matter. But in order to do that, I need very specific ranges on my infusion. I did need to wait until I got Chorus to make the Potions of Flight for the base charm though. But to infuse it, I need very specifically low quanta, lower than the default rate, and very specific Arcana and maximum Eterna. I need some very specific shelves, so to start, I'm going to Mars and collecting the soul of a Martian raptor. Now I need a mob imprisonment tool. I'll be using this to capture a Warden. I'm summoning the Warden using that soul from the Martian raptor and some other items that are pretty easy to get. I believe I've gotten all of them before. As a reminder, Echo Shards are gotten from the Shady Wizard villager. Once you summon him in, he's only going to be around for a little bit until he despawns. This is why you had to capture him with the mob imprisonment tool. Next, I need to make a mob crusher and a mob duplicator. The mob duplicator is going to kill mobs from the mob farm to make essence. I don't need the Reaper generator anymore, so I'm just going to take it down and repurpose it. You can give it range add-ons if you want to increase its range. I'm also voiding all the items because I don't really need them anymore. I'll also be using an ender tank to send the essence over to where I'm doing the mob duplication. Alright, time to summon some Wardens. I've never fought one in vanilla before, but I have my Mekasuit, and pretty much nothing can stand up to the Mekasuit, so I don't really care. You might want to set it to pulse on redstone though, so you're not spawning them constantly. Fighting 2 at once is a bit of a challenge, I guess. You know, if I'm not like mostly immune to damage. And even if I wasn't mostly immune to damage, I have so many health bars. Now I need some Sculk. To do that, I'm going to use the material generator, but I'm going to need some experience in my pedestals. Not liquid experience though, the special pedestal experience. To get this, I can simply use a fluid converter upgrade. Because I'm not spawning Wardens anymore, I can just borrow that ender tank. Then I use my ender tank, auto-export the essence fluid, put it in the pedestal with the fluid converter, and then send that over to the other pedestal with the material generator. This will make sure that it has experience to produce Sculk with. The only other thing you need to know is that you need a Silk Touch pickaxe to produce Sculk. The Sculk was required for echoing Sculk shelves. Now I need melons for melon shelves. Easiest way to get to more melon blocks is to just use the phytogenic insulator to grow more of them. It even already grows the blocks for me. To specifically have the correct stats to infuse charms, you need the following: 5 Draconic Endshelves, 2 Echoing Sculk Shelves, 2 Melon Shelves, 2 Candles, and 1 Skull. That gets you the exact range you require. There are probably a few other permutations that can accomplish this, but that's the one I went with in the end. The only hard part was getting those end shelves, and that's because the dragon heads. You can always get more of those in end cities though. So now that I've infused my charm with flight, I can fly permanently anywhere. Isn't that wonderful? Now that we've done all that, I've finally killed enough time to get started on this fusion reactor. You'll notice that I'm still not running at 100% capacity right now, but if nothing else, I'm showing off all of the things that I did to increase the speed at which I'm getting water into it. We got entangled blocks, a whole bunch of pipes, and the pipes that disconnected from the entangled blocks. I'll have to try putting it in on insert mode, maybe that will fix it. Well, beside that, I've just set up some redstone so it's easy to reset them if something gets stuck. Alright, time for some final checks, and then it's go time. You're gonna get a nice dramatic recreation of my actual emotions and utterings during this lovely time in which I was running the stupid fusion reactor. With a flip of a lever, it is ready to get started. The things all turn on at once, lots of power coming out, everything's looking pretty good. Wait, the flow rate's way too low. Oh, I need inventory cables. Come on, gotta craft more inventory cables, hook them all up to the reactor. Craft faster, craft faster, craft faster. Come on, go, 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 go. Oh, now I'm throttling the steam output. Okay, so there's a quirk with mechanisms transmitters. If you put a bunch more on the line, it transfers a lot more at once for some reason. It doesn't matter if they're actually extracting or not. This should fix the steam extraction rate so I'm not throttled by that. Okay, good, it's working. It seems to be fluctuating between 3 and 7 million RF per tick. The spikes are when the super factory manager pushes more water into the reactor. Actually, something important I forgot to mention is that I made the turbine much bigger. I made it into a full-size 9x9 interior, with a bunch more turbine blades. I believe it's 3 blocks taller. Sometimes you just need to make the turbine bigger to get more power out of it. We need all hands on deck, that means the fission reactor too. That'll make a few more million RF per tick. Run that thing at 40 millibuckets per tick, it should be able to handle it. Okay, it's produced a decent amount of antimatter so far. You can check out how fast it's producing it by looking in the SPS's GUI. I don't think I said that SPS stands for Supercritical Phase Shifter, by the way. It'll keep pumping out antimatter into the tank. We're aiming to get at least 2,000, and then a little bit of change. It just has to hold on for that long. I've added even more water input to it. Now I'm receiving from both pipes and from the inventory cables. Push, push, push. Keep going. I know you can do it. We're having throttling. Why are we having throttling? We're having throttling because the pipe's disconnected again. Okay, I can just right-click them with the configurator and that will fix it. Now to check back in with the reactor. I can see a whole lot more steam coming out of it. It's much better than it was before. Still struggling though. Definitely should have optimized this beforehand. Didn't know it was going to be this much of a challenge. Please, for your sake, make sure you get a lot of water going into this thing before you start. The high is 9.7 million RF per tick, and climbing. The more of this water I put in, the faster it's gonna go. How are we doing on fuel? Not great. There's a clog. I need to fix it, like right now. You can see all the chemical tanks I made in anticipation for this, and I didn't end up filling most of them. Like I said before, 5 is probably enough. But you should definitely get that water going as soon as possible. Alright, time for my special technique. Go faster, go faster, go faster, go faster, go faster, go faster. Come on, solar neutron activators. I know you can do it. We have that whole stock of lithium. Come on, keep going. Go faster, chemical infusers. Everything needs to be moving at light speed to keep up with the fuel production rate. Haha, get it? Light speed? Because it uses light from the sun to activate? I'm funny, I know. I'm hurrying along. Lithium is only gonna hold up for so long, though. After adding a whole bunch of connectors and water and another port and all that, I'm finally capping out at 30 million RF per tick. Not bad. Could be better, but for right now, this is probably as good as it's gonna get. Need as many tanks as I can get, as many pipes as I can get, pull, 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 all the water, gotta get that into the reactor, turn it to steam. Make sure you're not throttling yourself on the steam output either. Putting everything I have into it, I have over half of the antimatter I need, just has to keep holding out for a little longer. It's probably been about 20 minutes by now, I think. Alright, let's throw the entire induction matrix into it as well. That'll give it another 5 million. Should be more than enough, right? Right, of course. That's another 300 billion to work with. We're gonna keep charging through till the very end. The entire base is powering this thing. Good thing I made that energy cube on the stasis chamber so the wither won't get out. We're just about out of fuel and we still have 200 millibuckets of antimatter to go. Well, I guess after all my best efforts, there's only so much I can do. Except for one key detail, I suppose. The fusion reactor keeps most of its heat before it turns off completely. So any little shreds of fuel I keep pumping into it will let it squeeze that much more energy out of the heat it had built up. It will still make more steam, and even though it'll be less over time, it should be enough to have enough momentum to just barely finish its way to the end. I don't care how many times I repeated words in that sentence. I think we're good. That is a load off of my back. Okay, now with all 2,000 millibuckets of antimatter ready, I can dump them into the chemical crystallizer and make 2 pellets of antimatter. That's useful for making the Antiprotonic Nucleosynthesizer, a machine that performs some types of transformations with antimatter and an input ingredient and some power. And it's not all too useful, of course. It's going to be used for a few crafting recipes, and that's about it. But we had fun with that whole fusion reactor nonsense, right? Yeah, of course we did. Oh, also, the gauge dropper is useful for transferring small amounts of gas, as well as emptying the gas inside of a machine. So, with that done, I think I'm gonna call it an episode there. We did a lot today. A whole 47-minute long episode. Just about, I guess. We're just about at the end of the pack. As I said before, the next episode will be the last regular episode. That doesn't mean this is the end for me playing Sky's Expert. If you have any other things you'd like me to see or cover in a tutorial, I'll get around to that. I'll also be covering any updates to the pack that might change the information present in my guide. Of course I have to. It's not like I made an update video right as soon as an update changed something that I made in a previous video before. But with that, this has been Pick. I am glad to have seen you, and I hope to see you again. Thank you for watching, and as always, my document to the tip guide is in the description.